Not changing? Okay, we can just, there we go. We offer our salutations to the all-loving being who endows all beings with consciousness. We meditate on the Lord, who is the origin of the universe. Lord, thou abidest in all. Thou art all. Thou assumest all forms. Thou art the origin and goal of all. Thou art the self of all. Thou art existence, knowledge, and bliss. Salutations unto thee. May the world be peaceful. May the wicked become gentle. May all creatures think of mutual welfare. May our minds be occupied with what is spiritual and abiding. May our hearts be immersed in selfless love for the Lord. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Okay, can you switch over here? Okay, so my talk tonight is titled How to Profit from a Prophet. It started out as a set of musings from Ridgely. I attended the Ridgely retreat this past September. It's been a while since I started with an opening song, but because the song came to me in a very unusual way, I am going to use an opening song tonight, and I'm going to tell you how it came to me. So as I was doing some research for the talk, I was doing a search with one of the search engines, and I got bounced to a page in a language that I didn't quite recognize at first. And so, of course, the page browser has a translator. And so I said, translate this page, and it was a Swedish page. And they talked about there the precious gem, or the pearl of great price. And so I looked at it, and it was originally an anonymous poem written in Sweden, but then it got translated in the year 1893, which happened to be the same year as the Parliament of Religions. So I said, well, somehow something sent me to that page, to this song. So the song, being that old, is in the public domain. So I put an orchestration around it, which I will now play for you. The orchestration has three parts. The first part is an instrumental, and the clarinet and flute will just carry the melody. For those of you who like to sing, that'll be your opportunity to pick up on the melody. It's a very simple melody, actually. You can catch it. And then the second and third pass through, I will bring in the orchestra, a lot of instruments, but there, if you know the song, please feel free to sing along. If you don't know the song and you don't want to sing, I've put a parable that Swami Vivekananda tells called The Oyster and the Pearl, which you can read about during the first pass through the song, and then the second and third you can just read the lyrics. So with that, let's begin with the Pearl of Great Price, done in the style of late 1800s orchestra. Okay, so as I started the talk, I traveled to originally Manor with Swami Yogananda this past Labor Day weekend. Originally, if you don't know, is the estate in the Catskill region of New York, where Swami Vivekananda has known to have stayed on at least 3 documented occasions. And so my talk started as some musings on some points that came up during the retreat. It's not a repeat of the topic or anything, it's just my musings of it. And then it evolved into a slightly different direction after that. But the topic of the retreat was The Prophet by Lebanese-American poet Khalil Gibran. And so it started out with some thoughts about prophets. So prophets are generally recognized as intermediaries between the divine, bringing down teachings and enlightened teachings to the people. And many cultures all around the world recognize certain teachings, certain messages, and prognostications as prophetic decrees, known as prophecies or divinely inspired utterances. In Hinduism, there are the 7 seers, the Saptarishti, who are said to compose the 4 Vedas while entering into divine communion with the Supreme Cosmic Spirit. And Swami Vivekananda described these rishis as the seers of thought. So before they go into their meditation and they bring down these thoughts that they see there. And so we'll see later in the talk as well that communion with the Supreme Spirit is claimed by many traditions and cultures, and is often associated with people or cultures of exceptional achievement, and I'll have more on that later. And so also, although the title of the talk uses the word prophet, really what I will discuss really applies to all holy personages, saints, sages, incarnations, avatars. The word prophet was chosen primarily for its function as what they call a homophone, or a similar sounding word, so the play on prophet and prophet was the title there. But Gibran's story begins with the prophet getting ready to board a ship, and he's about to depart some people whom he had lived and taught among for 12 years. And so as he's getting on the ship, getting ready to go away, the people gathered around and said, well, can't you stay a little bit while longer? Please stay, continue teaching among us. So my first musing was, well, I wondered if the prophet had lived among them for 12 years, and the people are still asking more, did they make the best use of those 12 years? And so maybe yes and maybe no, and my purpose is not to judge or evaluate, but rather to simply explore the idea of how we might maximize any potential gains available in such a scenario. And so perhaps, the prophet's teachings are so deep and so expansive that it would take many lives before the full expanse of these teachings can be absorbed and unfolded in a life. And an analogy for that would be a gallon jug. A full gallon jug won't fit into a single teacup, right, without multiple fillings and re-enterings. So in that case, a continual reminders and continual lessons from a sage and prophet would be essential over beyond 12 years until the people could absorb and manifest all of those lessons. Or perhaps, as it is said in Matthew 13, in them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but perceiving, but never perceiving. They looked, but they did not see, and they listened, but they did not understand. So in either case, the idea of optimizing the time and energy allotted to us in this lifetime, and therefore maximizing our return on investment for many spiritual teachings that come our way, I think is certainly an idea worthy of consideration. So for example, if we invest a sum of money into a financial product, such as a CD, a treasury, a mutual fund, some other securities, and after 12 years we have the same amount or less, we would certainly say we've made no investment gain, and in some instances we may have even taken a loss. So there is this story also, it's called the Parable of Tenants. And a wealthy man was about to go on a journey, and he called his 3 servants to him. And to the first he entrusted 5 bags of gold. To the second servant he entrusted 3 bags of gold. And to the third he entrusted 1 bag of gold. So when the master came back, the servant who he entrusted the 5 bags of gold gave him back the 5 original bags, but 3 bags of profit. So that's 60% return on investment, so that's pretty good. The second returned his original 3 with 1 additional bag. So that's a 33% return on investment. But the third didn't even deposit his 1 bag. And so the master got very angry. And he said, well, at least you could have put it in a bank and made some interest. But the servant was so scared of losing it that he just hid it in the field. So we must ask and answer ourselves honestly at every turn, have we made the best possible use of any teachings which have been revealed and understood by us? And I've underlined in my notes, understood. Or as it was put in the song, has your trust in yourself, in your merits, come to naught? So, of course, in the financial world, we must read a prospectus and evaluate any investment product before investing. We must understand the risks, the potential gains, and the fees. We must avoid choosing too risky a stock or an investment, hoping for a quick, large gain, investing in a fad or during a period of irrational exuberance, and then only to find ourselves with a sudden or an unexpected loss. And so the interesting thing here too, that parable, I wonder, do masters really know in whom they will trust their highest thoughts and their highest wisdom? And we'll look at some examples. For example, Sri Ramakrishna recognized Swami Vivekananda right off, and he knew that this person, this soul, was going to be the one on whom I based the future of my organization. So we're not going to ask a prophet to talk about the future trends of Wall Street, of course, and the idea of this talk is spiritual gain, self-knowledge or self-realization as they're called in Vedanta Yoga. And so later we'll look at some teachers of Shankaracharya, but before that I want to examine 2 prerequisites, and the ideas of those are recognition and expectation of results. So point 1, without properly identifying and recognizing a prophet or finding our chosen ideal, without this, no prophet is possible, right? We have to pick a chosen ideal or something or someone on which to determine our spiritual destiny. Arjuna asks this very question in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 34. He says, "O Krishna, what are the characteristics of one established in this transcendental wisdom? How does the person walk? How does the person talk?" And Krishna then, of course, enumerates all of the qualities and characteristics of one established in spiritual wisdom. That can be a guide to 2 things. First, the goal that we're seeking to achieve ourselves, but also recognizing one who has such characteristics and may be worthy of following. In Matthew 15 and 16, we were also given criteria, but in the form of a warning. It says, "Beware of false prophets who come dressed up like sheep, but inwardly they are ravening wolves." It further asks, do you pick fruit from a barren thorn bush? And then it answers directly, no, so by their fruits you shall know them. So we should pick carefully and beware of those promising quick, large gains with little effort. And just as there are junk bonds in the financial world, some prophets are worthy of investing in, and others may not be so. And some of these later class of pseudo-spiritual teachers might be considered junk prophets and better kept away from them. Some might be out to steal or covet one's goods or their neighbor or their wife. And some have caused great harms to society and people. And of course, there have been many news stories of such cases, and so I'm not going to repeat all of the details. But this very question came up actually on Tuesday night, last Tuesday's class here, when somebody asked about, well, if all religions lead to the highest goal, how is it so much damage has been done by some religions over the course of humanity? Swami Vivekananda himself studied Sri Ramakrishna carefully and tested him on several occasions. And even at the very moment of Sri Ramakrishna's passing, Vivekananda even then wanted one more proof, as it's written about in the books. Sometimes such relationships of recognition are immediate and mutual. Sri Ramakrishna is said to have recognized Swami Vivekananda immediately. But just like the parable, the masters perhaps know in advance to whom they will entrust their gold or their highest teachings. Okay. It's said in the Bible there that, why do you speak to the masses in parallel and give us, the direct disciples, different teachings? And Jesus explains that too. Well, to them, the parables are sufficient, but to you, I'm giving you a different teaching. And actually, so tying it back to Ridgely and my musings on Ridgely, Josephine MacLeod, one of the original occupants of Ridgely Manor, saw in Swami Vivekananda somebody who was unique, and she wrote in February 25th in her journal, I believe Swamiji to have been the biggest spiritual force that has ever come to earth. In March 13th, 1939, she wrote, "Oh, the wonder of my having recognized Swamiji instantly and irrevocably. On that recognition, the past 40 years of my life has been built." And MacLeod was also amazed and held by Swami Vivekananda's seemingly unlimitedness. She says in her writing on March 12, 1923, "The thing that held me in Swamiji was his unlimitedness. I could never touch the bottom or top or sides." And she predicts here. She says, "I think Nivedita's hold was that too," meaning Sister Nivedita was also so touched by Swami Vivekananda and impressed by this seemingly bottomless or topless reservoir of spiritual knowledge. And even in a talk here a couple Sundays back, September 16th, by the visiting Swami Savastananda, head of the center in England, that Swami stated in this quote from the Sunday talk, "As everything Swami Vivekananda predicted came true, such as World War I in Europe, the rise of communism in Russia and China, the Indian freedom in 50 years, he can be regarded as a prophet, and we can look forward to the eventual new civilization." So that was a quote from the visiting Swami. Okay, so now given that we've made a choice and selected a prophet, a saint, a sage, an incarnation, or a chosen ideal which to follow, what really is the expected gain or return on investment from following this? And so in another of Josephine MacLeod's writings, she asked, "New prophets bring new gifts, don't they?" So what are these gifts? What can we expect? What should we expect? So some seekers who take up yoga and Vedanta look for psychic powers, clairvoyance, levitation, and other esoteric phenomenon. And then there's that story that I think it's in Raja Yoga, but it may also be in some of the other books, such as Sri Ramakrishna and his Divine Play, of the two men, and they both had peculiar powers, really, that had come from their association with spiritual teachings. The first could, using a magic ball, make himself invisible. And he started misusing this to enter people's houses without permission. So when Ramakrishna found that out, he took that power away. The other one was able to emit light from his back. And one dark night when Ramakrishna was trying to make his way back to the room, he exposed his light-emitting area there and lit up the pathway for Sri Ramakrishna. But even though well-intentioned, Ramakrishna wasn't happy with that, and he took that power away from that person too. And even Swami Vivekananda, he once told Sri Ramakrishna that he was getting the ability to read minds and see into the future, and Sri Ramakrishna told him, "Stop meditating for a few days until this capability goes away." Because these powers, if they do arise, are really not the purpose of these yoga and Vedanta teachers, and become distractions. They may be fascinating as subject matter or potentially even tempting to acquire, but they become sidetracks because they're ego-reinforcing and sometimes ego-enhancing, and then they become a great danger. And even if they are tempting, it points to more meditation that we have to do on our own internal self, because it could point to subtle and hidden desires deep within. And so giving them up is required. The treasure in this talk, as well as the opening song, The Pearl of Great Price, is the realization of the oneness, or the self-realization. So anything else is a sidetrack. Seek first the kingdom of God, and all else that you need will be added to you, is the rule taught by Jesus. And Swami Yatishwarananda himself warns, as one proceeds to more and more subtle and subtle levels, there are temptations that are so great that even very advanced yogis struggle to reject these and overcome these. And Christ himself was tempted in the visions of power and glory while he was meditating in the desert just after his baptism in the Jordan by John the Baptist. So it's also said the purpose of yoga is really not to increase one's academic credentials, industrial skill sets, or physical prowess, but rather to dissolve all those subconscious limitations and increase one's ability to concentrate, so much so that the innate talents and capabilities rise of their own. And if I paraphrase Corinthians from the New Testament, all of these gifts are works of the one and the same Spirit. Spirit distributes them to each one as Spirit determines. So gifts of wisdom, mercy, healing, insight are spiritual gifts which can indeed be used in the service of the divine in all. But from observation, we still must inquire whether contact with prophets directly or indirectly imparts new industrial talents or improves one's academic skills or career skills. Why do I ask that? Well, I don't think we can discount the number of successful individuals or the collective accomplishments of societies, some of which rose to very great height by guiding their cultures with the teachings, precepts, and guidance for establishing moral righteousness or dharma, put forth by the saints and sages and holy personalities which lived within those societies. And throughout history, really, many individuals have reached very high levels of accomplishment in their chosen field. Tech giants, physicists, mathematicians, poets, composers, and many others were followers of or had associations with yogis, prophets, ascetics, and were inspired by their teachings. Aaron Schrodinger and other physicists were knowledgeable of the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads, and Schrodinger himself echoed the Vedantic tenet, commenting that consciousness is never experienced in the plural. Ramanujan, the Indian mathematician with little formal training, made significant contributions to the field. He credited his outstanding insights to divinity. He stated that this esoteric mathematical knowledge that came to him and was very difficult for even educated Westerners. Hardy ended up taking him under his wing at the very end over in England. But at first they saw all his writings, they didn't believe it. They said, you have to show us the proofs. But because they were coming to him through divine revelation, he didn't go through all of the laborious step-by-steps. He just wrote them down as they came to him. And he said there, an equation for me has no meaning unless it expresses a thought of God. And many of the great poets, composers, scientists of both the East and West attribute divine inspiration and divine revelation as the source of their accomplishments. A couple of quotes I have displayed there are from Ludwig van Beethoven. Music is the one incorporeal entrance into the higher world of knowledge, which comprehends mankind, but which mankind cannot comprehend. Continue, do not practice the art alone, but penetrate into its interior. It deserves it, because only art and science increase man to deity, or humankind to deity. Well, Swami Vivekananda said very similarly. It's right up there. The goal of religion is to manifest the divinity already present in every person. Manifesting this is the whole of religion. So if following practices such as meditation and yoga does not lead to or increase one's industrial skills, insights into all subjects, or result directly in a higher culture, then we have to take a look at an alternate hypothesis. And so the one I'll put forth for tonight is that perhaps prophets have a way of seeking out and interacting with successful cultures and accomplished people. So rather than being the cause or the source, they are drawn to them. So, we have to ask, was the meeting between Vivekananda and the businessman Leggett, who owned Ridgely Manor, or his meeting with Nikola Tesla and others, was that so attractive that Vivekananda went to them? Or were they so in tune with the higher spiritual wisdom that they were brothers, I guess, in this higher knowledge? So there's an interesting story that came out during the tour at Ridgely, and so it's going to seem like a bit of a sidetrack, but just bear with me as I go through the explanation, because it took place on a 4-par golf course, And apparently they took Swami Vivekananda to this place called the Four, I have to explain. Some of you may be golfers, this might be redundant, but many people might not understand this terminology, so I do have to go, and for the purposes of a thorough talk, tell you. So a 4-par hole means that ideally, if you get it right, nominally, you'll take 4 swings. You'll take the first red one down from the tee in the very lower right to about the middle between the water hole and the sand trap. The second one will go from the spot number 1 to the number 2 to the edge of the dark green circle, which is called the green. And then you have 2 smaller strokes called putts that will put it in the hole, and that would be 4. And that's sort of the nominal. If you do better than that, you're ahead of the game, and if you do worse than that, you're behind. So I used to play on a 4-par hole, and I was happy to do 6. Okay, just so you know. Okay, so just the distances now. So an average 4-par hole is 360 yards. Some of them much longer, some of them shorter. It's about 2 or 3 football fields or 2 or 3 soccer fields. So a hole-in-one means in one swing you're going to get the ball going 360 yards or 2 football fields or 2 soccer fields and getting into a hole about that big. Okay? So Swami Vivekananda watched all the players and he said, let me try, I'm going to do it in 1. Okay. So of course I wouldn't be telling the story if the answer was he didn't do it in 1. Of course now I wasn't there, so I'm only telling secondhand, right? But you'll have to admit or reject as you feel. But they asked him, they were amazed. They said, is this a result of your yoga? And so this was worth musing about, so now bear with me while I do the analysis here for you. So was it Vivekananda's ability to concentrate, observe, and just act? Right, so it says in the Mahabharata that Arjuna, when he shot his arrow, he didn't see the tree with the bird. He didn't see the branch with the bird. He didn't even see the bird. He saw the eye of the bird, which was his target, right? And such was his concentration. And only when he saw the eye of the bird, which was his intended target, did his teacher say it was okay to shoot. So now it was told in the story that nobody in Swamiji's group had achieved the hole-in-one prior to Swami's attempt. So it was not possible for him to simply observe the correct swing, learn what to do, and then just imitate it, because the correct example was lacking, right? There wasn't something there. So since the imitation part of it was lacking, because the person all preceding him didn't achieve it, it kind of means the following to me. First, a keen observation of all the prior players' swings and an immediate recognition of their defects, and calculating how the defects then perturbed the intended trajectory of the ball so that it got somewhere other than where it was intended to go. Everybody with me? Okay. Third, an ability to do a subsequent analysis of what he, Vivekananda, would need to do differently than all the ones that went before him to achieve this goal of making a hole-in-one shot. And all of this analysis would have had to been done in a few seconds or a few minutes maybe. And so we ask, well, what kind of a mind can operate so quickly and so efficiently and get it right on the first try? Was it just beginner's luck? So I decided to see what the probability was, and I went, actually there's a place called holeinoneshotinsurance.com, so somehow somebody's taking insurance about all of these things. But for a par 4, the numbers that I was getting were like 1 shot in 100,000, okay? So it was a long shot to say if it was beginner's luck. And people take years to master these things. They pay exorbitant amounts of money to learn all the nuances of golf swings and everything. And so it seems kind of hard to believe that first try, got it, boom. But so that's the story how it goes. But in his Raja Yoga, he gives another explanation perhaps. And he says, by intense concentration, nature gives up its secrets to us. And similar to the earlier quote attributed to Beethoven, he said something similar. Do not practice the art alone, but penetrate into its interior. It deserves it, because only art and science can increase man to deity. So another alternate explanation for this was that Swami Vivekananda simply directed the trajectory of the ball with faith, willpower, and concentration. And Jesus said to them, For verily I say to you, if ye have faith as little as the grain of a mustard seed, ye shall say to this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove itself, and nothing shall to you be impossible. Now, I like the poetic expression, but if you're not familiar with some of the words, there, hence means here, and yonder means over there. So what he was saying is you could tell the mountain go from here to there, and it would listen to you if you have that faith as small as a grain of a mustard seed. In today's vernacular, it might be reduced to something like, hey, yo, mountain, go bounce. Right? But anyhow, back to our story, and Josephine McLeod's observation. The thing that held me with Swamiji was his unlimitedness. I could never touch the top or the bottom or the sides. And so what is the nature of minds, or the mechanism for this cosmic contact, such that with little or no formal schooling, that mendicants, yogis, and swamis, and ascetics, some of them admittedly have no schooling or education, but yet they can converse with the visitors that come their way. You would think that some of the conversation topics would be so beyond their experience, their education, and their learning. But yet, it seems like, from what you see, they all hold their own in these discussions, which is a good question to ponder. And one hears about the Akashic record, in which all of the future events, past and present, are said to reside, and that it's accessible to seers and sages and prophets. And we heard about from the Swami here, too. He said that everything Swami Vivekananda foretold came true. So if there's more time, we can hear a little bit more about this later. But so to sum up so far, I think recognition and careful selection are the first two steps and are very critical steps, because this is the foundation on which a person lays their entire spiritual destiny. So far now we've explored two ideas about how to profit from a prophet, and the first is to recognize, and the second is to have some idea about what to expect. But now I want to look deeper into the Vedantic aspects. In Vedanta, the ultimate profit is knowledge, and knowledge here means the realization that one's true self, the Atman, is identical with Brahman. This knowledge is achieved through what Shankaracharya calls anubhava, or immediate intuition. And Sankara further contends that this direct awareness is construct-free and not construct-filled. And intuiting our oneness with Brahman is stated, of course, in the great sayings of Vedanta as, that you are Tat Brahmasi, or I am Atman Brahma, the self is Brahman, Aham Brahman Asmi, I am Brahman, or I am divine. Christ said, similarly, I and the Father are one. So this correct knowledge, which destroys the ignorance, psychological and perceptual errors related to Atman and Brahman, is obtained by three stages of practice. Shravana, meaning hearing first, mana, thinking about them, manana, sorry, and nididhyasana, meditating on them. And so analogous to these three, I guess in the context of this talk, is seeing and recognizing, then understanding the message and the teachings are sound and worth applying, and then applying them as prescribed, or at least working towards their proper application to the best of our ability. We heard that in the opening song. And for example, the term renunciation, it's often used. It can be interpreted in many ways: physically, emotional, psychological, or mental, giving up of the esoteric powers, and excerpting again from Josephine McLeod. You ask if I am utterly secure in my grasp on the ultimate. Yes, utterly. It seems to be a part and parcel of me. It is the truth I saw in Swamiji that has set me free. I hear only one word ringing in my ears day and night: renunciation. But I haven't any renunciation. But I have freedom. Freedom to see and help India grow, and that is my job. And how I love it. To see this group of fiery idealists burning new paths and outlets in this jungle called life. So remember, she was one of the original occupants of Ridgely, which was, fairly well-to-do place at the time, right? So her, for renunciation, she says, well, I don't have that renunciation, but I have the freedom and the ultimate grasp based on Swami Vivekananda's teachings, that at least I can work and support the mission and the idealists. Now, Nivedita actually did go as far as doing the renunciation and becoming a sister in that tradition. So that was a lot of background on 2 points, but now I want to take the full path from the recognition stage all the way to the highest Advaitic experience and then beyond, if there is something beyond. And so the full journey from the beginning, the recognition of the saint and sage, is very nicely explained in Meditation and Spiritual Life, a book by Swami Yatishwarananda. It's a book, one of my first books that I bought here, and I read it cover to cover every couple of years. There's that much in it. You can keep learning new things. But he depicts this journey as 11 distinct stages. And so when we get to stage 9, I'll give you a quick quiz, but let's start with stage 1. And in stage 1, he says, an ordinary person is drawn towards a holy person and accords worship to him or her. So we've already discussed this. This was a big part of the recognition part of my talk, so we can go quickly through here. Stage 2, he says, the person A sees more and more divine glory in B. And so as one learns from and has holy company with such a person, we begin to understand and get a glimpse of that person's depth. And we read that in Josephine MacLeod's writings too, Vivekananda's depth and breadth. So I discussed this one in detail earlier, so we'll go on to stage 3. And these figures, by the way, come directly from Swami Tisharananda's book. I did the rendering for PowerPoint, but I stayed as close to the original as possible. So in stage 3, A realizes that B is a glorious manifestation, while he or she is a poor manifestation, perhaps, but a manifestation anyway of the same infinite reality. And so now this is my commentary, not Swami Yatishwarananda's, but I thought this is really an important transition point in one's spiritual life, because at this point, it's for the first time, perhaps, we get the notion that I too am a manifestation, and that it's possible, at least possible, that we can partake in this divinity and manifesting this divinity. And so it becomes a life-changing event, and it inspires us to devote more and more time to our chosen path. Swami Yatishwarananda, actually a Swami that visited here, one of my first retreats, it may have been my first retreat here, put it very nicely and very emphatically, and I thought this was an outstanding quote. He says, it is not possible to have faith in God or your spiritual destiny until you meet someone who truly loves God and has put at stake their entire life. Do or die. The end of the quote from Swami Yatishwarananda. So these first 3 stages are considered by Swami Yatishwarananda anthropomorphic, meaning with human qualities or human-centered. So now the next, we come into the non-anthropomorphic sequence, and they become more abstract. But remember, we're going to the highest Vedantic realization here in about 4 more steps. So the abstractions have to become increasing. So in stage 4, the seeker realizes that he or she is a soul, a point of pure consciousness, while the reality is like a circle of pure consciousness, but the point seems to be more real than the circle. So maybe during one of our meditations, we hit that very still interval for maybe a short time. Maybe we don't hold it, but during that very short interval, we realize that for that brief instant or second or moment, however long we can hang on to it, I am, and that's all. And so we're beginning to get a look there now that, all right. But at this point, we are still considering, well, it's my experience, right? So even though we think we understand that the whole thing is a circle of pure consciousness, there's still a little bit of the I-ness left at this stage. Okay. But we can go further in stage 5. Stage 5, the aspirant sees both the point and the circle to be equally real. So now my personal thought here is that this one point one becomes probably really sincerely, we talk about not being afraid of death and all in Vedanta. Is it true to our soul and to our core? And I think at this stage it may be, because you say, well, whatever it is that I'm a part of exists with me or without me. And so it's not so much that I am more real than the circle now, that at least we're on the same par at this level, right? Okay, so I am as real as the universal consciousness. When we come to stage 6, however, you can see the center is becoming less and less. The I, the ego, the personal me is becoming less and less, and yet the ultimate reality remains the same, unchanged, right? And at this stage, Swami Yatishwarananda says that the circle is now more real than the point. And so at this stage, I think our actions and our work are truly less driven by ego desire, and we really see our work as part of something bigger than ourselves, not just in the poetic sense as, oh yeah, that's a cause bigger than myself, but some deeper, richer, intuitive sense that, okay, I am now an instrument in the hands of the divine here, and it's really not me, but it's the circle or the divine that is more real. And so we don't have to worry about fruits from those activities. All right, the next stage is completely gone, and this is the highest Advaitic experience in the non-dualistic school. We experience the oneness with the infinite. And remember what Shankaracharya said earlier, this is without construct. And it can't be put into words. It's been also the topic of the Tuesday night class, and just this past Tuesday, Swami Yogatmananda was reading from Sri Ramakrishna in his Divine Play. And he said that Sri Ramakrishna went into the highest samadhi with the intent of coming and explaining everything, but every time he went above the 5th center, he lost his voice. Mother would take the voice away from him, as he said. So he couldn't tell. So it can't really be put into words. But according to Shankaracharya, and I like this quote, self-knowledge is therefore not seen as an awareness of, so follow the words carefully, not as an awareness of, meaning I am seeing something, I am aware of something other than me, but instead an awareness that is Brahman. That means I take on this Brahman consciousness without differentiation. And since we will transcend any form of duality in the state of consciousness. So think about this, it's really profound what Shankar is saying here. Because to have an awareness which is Brahman directly implies one becomes all-knowing, right? And so is this how these mendicants and swamis and sages have access to all realms of knowledge, from the mundane to the divine, right? And Jesus himself said, my Father knows even the fall of the sparrow in the remote corner of the world. And so access to this all-knowingless state, Brahman consciousness, I think, to me, is what gives the saints and sages and prophets their ability to communicate at all levels of knowledge, from the mundane to the highest laws of Dhamma to humankind. And so I did say that there were 11 stages, or Swami Yatishwarananda said that there were 11 stages. So if stage 7 is the highest Advaitic experience, what else is there? So I will take these up right now, as explained by more than Swami Yatishwarananda, more than myself. But in stage 8, and this is how he depicts stage 8, he says, the circle, which is the highest reality, is seen to manifest as many souls endowed with greater or lesser glory. And so I depicted them by 2 dots, or Swami Yatishwarananda did. So I guess you can assume the bigger circles have the more glory and the smaller ones have a lesser glory. But nonetheless, they all have some. And so now the commentary is mine, no longer Swami Yatishwarananda's. But for me, this is where we see the dynamic play, the lila in action, right? The prakriti and the purusha of many souls, born out of the ultimate quiescence and cessation of all activity of the pure consciousness, are scattered, each endowed with a part of the glory, and each is seeking his or her return to the whole. So in other words, this innate desire for oneness is burned into each soul at the time of its creation and serves as our primary motivator. And although common to all of us, the attempt at realizing this oneness takes many forms, some honorable and some less honorable. But this gives rise to the play of life, the hero and the antagonist. And to me, it seems to be the plan on which nature is built. Positive and negative charges in electricity, north and south magnetic poles in magnetism, duality, each part seeking to rejoin the other half and reestablish the primal unity, the transcendental state. Thus, eating, marrying, helping, possessing, jealousy, covetousness, all have their root in this attempt to reestablish oneness somehow, me, mine, grab, right as a child wants to do mine, mine, mine. But, as I said, some are honorable and some are less so. Some attempts bring us closer to that stage 7. Others will bring us further away for a while until we learn the lessons of that. So now it's quiz time, so I'm going to look at the next 3 together, and one of them is missing. So if we look at number 10, that looks like the one we just looked at, number 8, and that's how Swami Yatishwarananda rendered them. And if you look at number 11, that looks like where we were back at 7. So what's the difference, and why did he bother to do a number 9, and what is hidden behind the question mark in number 9 is the question. So are there any guesses? Anybody want to venture forth? What goes on in number 9? Can I give a hint? The title of the talk? Okay. So in stage 9, we meet the prophet again, or the saint, or the sage. But this time it's in a new context, in a new setting. So the sage, this by Sri Ramakrishna calls this Vijnana, the integral experience. And I'm now more or less paraphrasing from pages 549 to about 552 in Swami Yatishwarananda's Meditation and Spiritual Life. But he says, according to Sri Ramakrishna, for most who attain to the true non-dual experience, 7, this one right here, it is the final experience. They do not return to the phenomenal world. But a small number of sages do come back, and they're exceptionally qualified and illumined souls, and they take up the challenges of exploring what he calls the horizontal planes of reality. So after attaining the highest unitive experience, when these sages come back, they see it in an entirely new light. So on the way up, the world and its beings and its entities progressively lose the reality and ultimately disappear in the fire of the one permanent highest bliss. But on the way down, the stages see all of these created beings as permeated through and through with Supreme Spirit. So I have one more slide which kind of sums it up. So the awareness of Brahman forming the background and substratum of all phenomena is not lost, but it's enriched by those souls which now have the knowledge of the immanence of the Spirit, of the divine, in each and every creature and person that they see. And this insight really gives rise to the claim of brotherhood, sisterhood, humanhood. Love our neighbor as ourself, right? It is really the solid, it's the bedrock. Oh, how did I write it there? But it is really the one unifying experience which gives rise. It's the foundation on which all of the religious teachings can be found, such as we are all one, we are all brothers and sisters, humanity, we are all part of one God. So with that experience, the sage, we meet the sage and the saints and the prophets in this new context now, that they have seen the highest, and they have not chosen to stay in that state, but they've come down to serve and lead all of the other beings to that stage. And so in some sense, it's the highest selfless state that you come and you live for the benefit of humankind. I think there's a similar story in Buddhism. They define, there's the bodhisattvas, and then there's one other type. one person achieves nirvana and stays, and the other person comes back to serve as an example and a leader to all. So with that, my talk ends here. It's about 5:50. So with that, we can progress on to the rest of the programs. Oh, you want me to ask some questions? Okay, on slide 4. All right, now I guess if there's questions or comments, we can take a few questions and comments if folks would like to add something or ask something. Charlie?
In the opening song, it seemed to say, have faith in God and not in yourself. But Swami Vivekananda said, if you don't have faith in yourself, you're an atheist. And what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so if you, I can go back to there actually. It says all of that in, okay, so the closing part of the song, which is an adaptation, which is my adaptation, by the way. The original words were, have faith in Christ and his cross, to be true to the author. So I have adapted them for a Vedantic interpretation. But, so I put, come to not before self, okay? Come to not before God, and not before all who are one. And the last sentence, you can say it produces an equivalence there, right? So the self, we realize our oneness with the Brahman at the highest.
So the individual is not before the whole, you mean?
Not before the whole. Eventually, just like, so as you...
Before the infinite.
So as we go up, all of the things, including our own individuality, gets lost. And then at stage 7, you hit the highest Vedantic, where you realize the transcendental quiescence, the non-activity state. But then coming back, should you be one to come back to teach, then you see others as, you still now see others, right? So it's the play, right? I think Todapuri, if you remember, in the story of Sri Ramakrishna, when he was trying to do the highest Advaitic, he kept being distracted by the vision of the mother. And so Todapuri took a piece of glass or something and said, stuck Sri Ramakrishna, he said, think here, focus here, focus here. And so finally Sri Ramakrishna had that non-dual experience. But then, if I remember the story correctly, Todapuri, who was a pure non-dualist Advaitist, didn't believe in the immanent or the mother aspect of it. But after spending a little bit more time with Sri Ramakrishna, near the very end, he then recognized. So it's this back coming out of stage 7 and back, you're now seeing duality again, but you're realizing it's the play of the transcendent and all of the souls are going back. So depending on whether you say, I am more real than the God is more real than me, or we're equal, depends on which of the 11 stages your personal viewpoint is currently aligned with. So that's a long answer, hopefully. Richard?
Vivekananda, in the end, recognized the divinity of Krishna, and something incredible must have worked through him to write, bring forth yogas and other work, to travel, something incredible. And we do suspect that was, in fact, just God
Yeah, I think just if I go back to my earlier example that a gallon jug doesn't fit in a teacup, you know, the infinite is infinite. The infinite can't all manifest all at one instant to everybody, or we would, you know, it would be like total annihilation, right? So it has to take different forms, different incarnations, and work through different vehicles that we see as anthropomorphic, right? Hence our attraction to that person, kind of like what I was saying earlier, right? So we recognize, you know, MacLeod had said that she recognized in Vivekananda the most important spiritual force, in her view, to come, right? And so was his power directly derived from Sri Ramakrishna, or were they one and the same? One thing that was always puzzling to me was that story after Christ's resurrection. Now remember, he lived in among his disciples for 3 years teaching, right, and traveling and teaching. Then he was crucified on Friday, buried on later Friday, Saturday, rose according to the Bible on that Sunday, and a few days later they met him walking down the road and didn't recognize him. Now, how do you live amongst somebody for 3 consecutive years, teaching, being a most intimate disciple, and then not recognize, unless the transfigured form was so significantly different than the bodily form, or they recognize something else? Maybe the physical form was different, but the teaching, and actually I had a whole bunch of notes on that, so maybe with a couple minutes, this is a big aside, but so the power of mantra and the vibrations and this notion, what Swami Vivekananda says, that the mantra seers, so they go into meditation. So Vedanta talks about the 4 levels of sound before it manifests, and there's subtle and subtle levels. And so, you know, I'm wondering if the disciples were receiving those lower level communications from this other person, right? And also, I think Ramakrishna says at one point, doesn't he? I'm giving it all to you now, and transfers. So whatever it is he transferred enabled Vivekananda to do, because I think he wanted to stay, right? Didn't he want to stay in the highest transcendental state? And he's well, no, not until your mission is completed, right? So I don't know if that answered your question, or if that's a big aside from where you wanted to go, but
I only heard this 50 years ago.
okay, well, if it's any consolation, time is an illusion, so you could just assume this was 50 years ago. No, okay, all right, enough of that. All right, so you need that. Okay. So Swami Yogatmananda is in Atlanta right now. He'll be coming back in time for the Tuesday class, which will go on as usual. The Friday class will go on as usual. There's a spiritual retreat this coming Saturday the 13th by Swami Chetanandananda from Vedanta Society of St. Louis. The title is Stories of Vedanta Monks. I checked with Naomi just before tonight's session, and she said registration is still open. It is at the higher rate of $30 now, but you can there's still seats available. So if you want to attend that program, please register as soon as possible, so we have an accurate head count for food and supplies and things like that. The week following will be Durga Puja from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., and that's the standard ritual worship, flower offering, prasad, followed by videos, a Durga dance, singing, and supper prasad at 7 p.m. The talk next Sunday will be given by visiting Swami Chetananda from St. Louis on Sri Sarada Devi and her divine play. So we've heard about Sri Ramakrishna and his divine play, so we'll now hear about Sarada Devi and her divine play next Sunday at 5 p.m. here. So with that, we'll do the closing prayer. You can join me. May the divine, who is Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Great Spirit of the Native Americans, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the all-loving being manifest unto us and grant us abiding understanding and all-consuming divine love. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. We'll now have arati and then followed by soup supper downstairs and then meditation here after soup supper at 7 p.m.